Welcome to VPGE's Diversity Works Speaker Series. So Diversity Works is a quarterly speaker series focused on the latest scholarly research on topics of diversity and inclusion and their professional, policy, and other applications. And for this year's Diversity Works series, we're very excited to partner with the John S. Knight Community Impact Fellows. So the JSK Community Impact Fellows are working on projects that address news and information gaps affecting Native American, Black, Latino, Asian, and other communities that have been significantly impacted by the pandemic, by systemic racism, and by the deterioration of legacy local news outlets. And VPGE would like to thank our colleague Michelle Lissand and Alberto Mendoza at JSK for their help in organizing this session. And I'd also like to thank our panelists and our moderator in advance for sharing their expertise on these necessary topics and for facilitating today's discussion. And before we begin today's session, I'd like to introduce Don Garcia. Don is the director of the JSK Fellowship and has a long background in journalism, including a master's degree from Stanford and positions with the San Jose Mercury News and the SF Chronicle, where she wrote about politics, immigration, and legal affairs. And most recently, Don has helped transform the JSK Fellowship from a sabbatical model to one that really asks fellows to become innovative leaders and change agents to reinvent journalism. So I'll turn it over to Don to introduce our moderator.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here today and to be partnering with VPG, which is a wonderful organization, wonderful department program on campus. We, the JSK Fellowships, are very happy to be part of this Diversity Works speaker series this year. Our program, which you said so well, what we're doing this year, we support diverse journalists from around the United States to work on projects in their communities to help fill the information gaps that are happening, really spurred on, exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. And we are in year 2 of a wonderful program to support journalists who are working in their communities around the United States. I am going to just say a little bit about the person who's going to take it off from here, the host. Rachel Dissel and we have actually 3 fellows from this year and last year's Community Impact Fellows, a very great group of people. So Rachel Dissel was a JSK Community Impact Fellow in 2021, so last year. And she was in the past an independent journalist. She's an independent journalist. She was reporting for many years for the Cleveland Plain Dealer and doing a lot of great investigative work. Really everything from a series called Reinvestigating Rape, which led to the testing of many Chicago rape kits that were not tested in the past, and Toxic Neglect, a series about exposing Cleveland's poor track record for public health. So many investigative projects. When she came to the fellowship, she was working on looking at the experiences of Clevelanders during COVID and how to get the information they needed. And she is now part of Cleveland Documenters. And Cleveland Documenters is a very interesting organization, and I'm sure she can tell you more, and so can Lawrence Caswell, who's here with us today, another member of that team. But Cleveland Documenters trains and recruits and pays people in Cleveland to document official city and county meetings that are not being covered because of news deserts and other problems going on with a lack of ability for local news to thrive really in Cleveland. And so she is an accountability reporter with the Cleveland Documenters and one of the editors there. And she's also supporting and mentoring emerging reporters in that area and in Cleveland Documenters. So I'm going to let Rachel take it away. And I'm so pleased to have 3 JSK Community Impact Fellows on this panel today. So thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Dawn. And I'm so glad to be back on the Stanford campus, even if it's virtually. I swear I'll get there in person someday to enjoy all the beautiful sights that I see and everybody's pictures in the background. And I'm really, really excited to be here today with Lawrence Daniel Caswell, who I get the pleasure of working with on a daily basis and have learned so much from. And with Maritza Félix, who I was a fellow with in the first cohort of the Community Impact Fellows, and who was really the energy that drove all of us through the pandemic on the days when we were the most tired. Maritza came excited and with stories to tell about all the work she was doing. And so I hope that she'll share some of those today. I was going to see if each of you just wanted to give a super brief introduction on what you're doing now and some of the things that you've been up to, and then we can jump into a discussion.
I can go first, if you don't mind, Maritza, if that's all right. I'm Lawrence Caswell, Field Coordinator for Cleveland Documenters. As Dawn said, we at base level, we train and pay Cleveland residents to document local government meetings. But I really think that that base level is a way for us to really provide better access to civic information, to much needed civic information, the Cleveland residents, while also I mean, some of this is a news piece, but some of this is really a community building piece. I mean, I think we feel like just providing access isn't sufficient. We are really trying to really build the civic and social infrastructure around civic information by really building community around the exchange of that information, around the sort of collection and exchange of that information. I have been involved in community media for a long time, since the 90s. It's been about 11 years at IdeaStream Public Media. So yeah, that's me. Cleveland Documenters is just a little over a year old, but I think we've gotten a lot of work done. Over 300, near 400 documenters trained. That's 400 Cleveland residents trained, near 400 meetings covered. But really, out of that, I mean, those are like the sort of hard metrics. The things that I'm most proud of is the community that we've built. This community of not just sharing information, but of a community of curiosity about local government, and really like providing people a space who want that information, who are curious about it, and want to talk with other folks to come and just ask questions, and together really dig into to how local government works and to understand it better, and also to try to find ways to share that information and share that excitement and that curiosity with other folks. And so we really build a more civic culture here in Cleveland, which we are in desperate need of.
Thank you. And Maritza.
Yes, so I'm Maritza Félix. I'm a Mexican immigrant journalist living in Arizona. I've been living here for the past over a decade already. I'm always high on caffeine all the time. Whenever you ask, I'm having a coffee, and with my Connect Arizona Coffee Max now. During the pandemic, I founded Connect Arizona. That is a news you can use service, and we use primarily WhatsApp to communicate with our families across the border. Very important information in their language about COVID at the beginning. And now we talk a lot about everything: immigration, the border, health. Today, we're gonna talk about depression in children, for example, with an expert in our cafecito in WhatsApp. And even though we're not filling the whole gap there is between the English and Spanish content available for our communities in Arizona, we're creating these human bridges that are really, really important for our community to get the information that they desperately need in their language. And another thing is, like, we have a great sense of humor. So we're like building this community as a family. So that's why we're having these difficult conversations that typically you don't have with traditional media outlets or with reporters that are always running around trying to chase breaking news, digital, weather, or whatever they're focused on. So that's what we're doing in Connect Arizona, having these difficult conversations. And we do everything as we do in the border is binational, collaborative, and bilingual. And we try to do everything like in a very informal but informative way.
Thank you so much. So I have a lot of questions. I'm sure we won't get to all of them before we get to questions from other folks. But I would love to hear from each of you on how storytelling, whether it's related to something going on in a local government meeting or talking about information families are getting on the pandemic, how is it different for you when community members are involved from the start of the process in terms of what questions need to be asked and answered and what stories need to be told?
I can start. Something that changed for me a lot during the pandemic and with Connect Arizona is that I needed to stop assuming what the community needed or wanted. So we as journalists, we're so used to be always providing and giving out information and what we think that they need, but we never stop and ask actually what the community actually needs. So that's something that I did. The pandemic forced me to stop. And then with the WhatsApp group and these conversations that I'm having every single day with my community is like, please, Maritza, stop your brain and start asking questions. Since how are you? What do you need? What kind of experts do you need? And then how do you see themselves? Because our community changes and evolves just like us. And sometimes they don't know what they want, just like we do. So it's like, how do you see yourself? What do you need? How do you need it? And something that I actually learned as well is stop asking my community to come to me. And it's like, I don't expect you to sit down in your sofa for 3 hours just to watch the newscast for the package that I'm going to present. No, it's like, where are you? This is what I have for you. I'm going to come and meet you, and I'm going to show it like in a very informal, very like, I don't know, human way of telling stories. And as we were saying during my first year of fellowship, is like, we stop being like an extractor of stories, and we're using community mostly as an inspiration just to tailor the content exactly for they are. And there are so many difficult topics that we cover. So we're always talking about politics one way or another. We're always talking about the pandemic and conspiracy theories. And I'm always fact-checking information and combating this misinformation. But we try to make it accessible, easy to understand, simply in their language. And I think that's something that has worked really, really well. And that's something that has helped us grow to different platforms to meet more needs that they needed to be addressed.
I think Cleveland Documenters as a whole has a sort of interesting take on storytelling. It's probably a little different for news outlets in general. I mean, I feel like for the news, like the story itself is like a fundamental unit of news. But I really feel like the issue for the documenters programs in general, but really for Cleveland, it's not so much, it's not that we aren't a news desert. It's not that there hasn't been a great reduction of reporters in reporting, but I feel like what residents have been asking for and what residents need is, it's not so much that they don't need news, but what they aren't getting is really civic information. And so in some ways, I feel like we're looking at things at almost like a sub storytelling level, or maybe not even sub storytelling, but maybe thinking, let me back up. In some ways, I feel like storytelling is, I get a little nervous about the way that the journalists talk about storytelling in general as the story being the ultimate thing. And I feel like one of the fundamental elements about Cleveland Documenters is that we really are focused on building tools, something that is going to be something that another person can use. And so I really feel like we think about the story as a tool. So the story in and of itself is just a tool. What is this story being used for? And so for us, at base level is like just what's happening in these meetings. Like just at a meeting, just documenting what's happening in a meeting. And documenters themselves are doing that coverage in the meeting, documenting that for the rest of the community. Where the storytelling really comes out is that via documenting these meetings, whether in meeting notes or live tweets, documenters are really guiding, using their curiosity. We encourage them to ask questions. Why did this work that way? Why did this thing happen? Why did they make that decision? And so, and again, that curiosity comes out. It's almost like it's a sub level of the storytelling. It's just asking questions, which is just as fundamental a place as telling the story. I mean, honestly, maybe sort of outside of journalism, but if we think about the basis of the scientific method, asking questions is the most basic level of how we get to the rest of understanding that comes through observation and analysis. And so we really try to encourage our documenters to use and lead with their curiosity. And then on the back end, what we do with that, I say on the back end, but it's not really the back end. It's like in this process, we try to follow up on that curiosity, engage them in that process with reporting that could be longer stories. It could be something shorter. I mean, I think in some cases, that curiosity doesn't turn into reporting. It turns into yet another documenter's assignment, like a special survey assignment. The first example of that was we had documenters in meetings asking about the city's response to COVID, and asking how Clevelanders were really feeling about the vaccine. And so we took that and worked with documenters and built that into a survey assignment where documenters went out and interviewed Greater Clevelanders about their views on the vaccine, and then turned that into a story where we were then kicking out these and we talked with, I don't know, like 40, 44 different Clevelanders, way more than anybody else had really talked to very early.
It was like 80, I think.
It wasn't, oh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the later ones. It was more like 80. It was like, yeah, it was around 80 folks that we spoke to. And what we heard from them, the insights we heard from them, we weren't hearing in any other outlets. And so in some ways, that's another spot where the storytelling comes in. It's not even so much us going out and saying, hey, let's get these stories that we aren't hearing. It's documenters in these meetings. Issues are being raised for them. They're asking questions, which is then guiding us to set something up so that they're actually getting the stories of residents. The other piece I think about these survey assignments, which we've done a few now, that I think are really interesting in terms of telling stories of community members, hearing stories of community members that we don't normally hear from, is that the kinds of things we heard from documenters are not the kinds of things we heard from residents via these surveys are not the kinds of things that we were hearing when a reporter comes and goes into the community and asks these questions. We asked documenters to go out and interview folks in their networks. A lot of them talk with people that they didn't know, but they talk with people that they did know. And that level of trust between them really pulled out a number of insights that we just weren't seeing anywhere. I mean, we saw evidence that the residents that folks had about the vaccine wasn't just about conspiracies and wasn't just about other things that were being reported on, but really about folks like level of risk in their communities, folks not wanting to miss work, all of these things that I would say a few weeks after our report came out, we started to see in the national press. I don't think we get to those things if we didn't have documenters themselves talking to folks in their own networks with that level of trust that they have. Very different. So
yeah, and so I think one of the points that you've made before is, who gets to decide which questions are asked is a very important thing.
Yes, it is.
Involving community in that from the get-go is pretty important. And Lawrence, you started to answer my next question, so I'll say it, and then Maritza might have an answer to it too. I think when we're talking about these things as ideas of how we involve community members and residents in this process, sometimes it's hard to grasp. So I would love to hear any specific examples that we can think about, whether it's a tool or a project or a story that either of you worked on that you think turned out differently than it would have without the involvement of residents or community members from the beginning. So if it was just done the traditional way, journalists asking questions, it might have turned out one way, but with this community approach, it turned out differently. So examples welcome.
I can go. I mean, honestly, I can think of a bunch of them. That Voices on the Vaccine series is a big one, but also I think about the story that we did about city councils, their sort of legislative process, and it's something that documenters, from the moment we had documenters going to city council meetings, they were asking questions about how these processes work. Why is every ordinance an emergency ordinance? Why do they suspend their own rules? And we were asking those questions too, but I feel like if we had just said, okay, they're asking those questions, let's write a story about it. It would have been a very different story. The way that story would have turned out would have focused on the typical news things. I don't think we would have dived as deep into trying to really for residents explain how this process worked. And that really turned out that way, not just because it came out of documenters' questions, but because we then went back and with documenters developed questions for yet another survey, interviewing Clevelanders about how they get local government information, how they get information about meetings, how they understand government, and then sort of folded that back into the stories itself. So I mean, I don't think if we didn't have in mind the questions that residents themselves were asking and didn't have those in front of us, I think that story looks very different. I mean, I've seen stories written about city council processes, but it's much more like political, like this council person said this, they say it's that way, and like very little in the way of council's actual processes are explained or questioned in a way that residents can understand. By centering residents in that process, like, again, that story is not just a story about, oh, council may be doing something they shouldn't be doing. It was really written from as a tool so that residents could understand that process and critique it through that understanding. We don't get to that unless we do that at every step in that process with residents and really with documents.
Well, I think Connect Arizona per se is the greatest example of something that we have worked together as a community, because at the beginning, it was just people sending me personally messages, asking questions about coronavirus and information that wasn't available in Spanish in Arizona. And Arizona is kind of little Mexico. So we really need to have that information in Spanish and very cultural sensitive as well, not just a translation. And then when we created the group, we realized that we were ready, and not just ready, eager to have conversation about these issues. So we were talking about, at the beginning, well, the vaccines wasn't an option yet. It was face mask mandates. It was like isolation. It was when business were allowed to open again. There were so many questions. When were kids going back to school? And we were having those conversations. And that's when we identified that the coronavirus pandemic wasn't just about health. It was about education. It was about finances. It was about immigration issues. It was about the border being closed because we go back and forward to Mexico every single day, and we depend on them for the economy, for example, and they depend on us, and we have families on both sides of the border, so everything. So from those conversations that we were having, we realized that we needed to have a bigger echo of our stories during the election process. So we started working with different organizations, and we did listening sessions in Spanish to talk about national issues that were important to our families from the local community perspective. Then when the border was announced to be reopened, we have so many questions that there was a lot of people saying all kinds of things in social media. So what we do is like, what questions do you have? So we brought experts to our group. We brought experts to our radio show. We did a guide of resources for you in Mexico and the US for the border reopening. And that's something that we're like doing more often, guides to do, to get to whatever, and then getting those connections. And another thing that is really good, that is it's not just us preaching to the choir. It is actually the community is inspired and everything. They're letting us know what they want. And me as journalist leading this project, sometimes it can be so challenging because I need to stop and listen and stop assuming. And sometimes that is really hard. And it's so hard to listen things that we don't align with, or we don't think they're like okay, or awkward silences. Those are really hard to understand, and try to transform that silence in something that is journalistic available for them as a community. So I think Connect Arizona as a whole is the better example of how the community can help you build something that at the beginning was just an experiment. And now we are a social and a news organizations, and we have WhatsApp group, broadcast list, a radio show, a newsletter, and pretty soon to come, a mini podcast for WhatsApp series. So we're growing.
Thank you so much. So I have a couple more questions at least. I'll go as long as everyone will let me. Often, often in journalism, when we're talking like news, and I know that what we're talking about here is not we don't use the strict definition of news organizations for what we're doing. But often there's this heavy focus on metrics that can be measured. Are you growing? Are people showing up? Are there hits? Are there clicks? And as each of you do this work and you're building a new foundation for sharing information, for healthier ecosystems for information, can you talk a little bit about how you personally measure the shifts that you see and the value that you and that the community gets from the way that this work is being done?
That's something that actually keeps me up at night, because Conecta is using non-traditional platforms to do a kind of traditional work that is journalism. So in WhatsApp, for example, the heart of Conecta Arizona is encrypted. So how am I going to be able to get some metrics from it? It is like we're respecting privacy. This is non-traditional. It wasn't created to have news and information spread through WhatsApp, but that's actually how we're using it. So besides the newsletter stats and the radio show numbers and everything, the Connect Arizona, the heart of it is really, really difficult to actually put a number on it. What we have done, for example, is like we try to put numbers on so many other things. It's like how many people participate every day in the WhatsApp channel? How many experts have we invited? How many questions we have answered? During the border reopening, we answered more than 100 questions daily in WhatsApp on people from both sides of the border. During the election process, we got in 1 week more than 500 questions answered by me or other journalists or experts in the topic. So we know that what we're doing is actually working. But we are relying a lot of testimonials, but not testimonials like the ones that you ask people to send you. But when they text me, it's like, Maritza, I finally was able to get my children vaccinated because you connected me to this person. Of Maritza, I finally renewed my passport because thanks to Connect Arizona, the Mexican consul actually answered my email. So that's what we're trying to do, trying to prove that journalism cannot be measured as we used to, because we are not the same. Newsrooms are not the same. The community is not the same. Nobody is the same. And using all tactics, all tools to trying to measure something that is new, it is extremely, extremely difficult. So for example, yesterday I was saying that for us, because we're still trying to build this model that is going to be more sustainable for the years to come, it's like, I feel that Connect Arizona is like Leonardo DiCaprio. We're always so close to the Oscar, so close to the funding. But since we cannot prove that what we're doing is actually working in numbers as the funders want to, we are always so close and so far away from the Oscar, from the funding, from those awards. So I think that we as media organizations, we need to start redefining how we measure our success, and then start having those conversations with our stakeholders, foundations, organizations, peers, experts, sponsors, about what we want to achieve and how we're going to make sure that we're achieving it, and not using traditional tools to do so. Because if we're not doing anything traditional, how can we expect to measure that through the same eyes that we did?
I think for us, it's very similar in that traditional approaches to metrics for news organizations are not really applicable to us. I mean, I think we could go and try to figure out what the metrics are for our notes on Google Docs or our live tweets, and we will probably look at that. But I think we have really tried to keep in mind that we are both a news and information organization, but also a community building organization. And I think the longer I'm involved with this, the more, I mean, even when I think about starting out with the JSK Fellowship, I really came in thinking that I was going to be focused on recruitment, on outreach. And the more time I was able to spend thinking about it, I realized that for us, not just trying to provide folks with civic information, but really building community and trying to create a new civic infrastructure about this. That for us, the metric is really like how tightly connected is that community. When folks show up, are they like excited? Like, do they get do they feel like, oh, this information that I learned from covering these meetings, I feel more tied in with local government. I feel more tied in with the community. I mean, I think there are other ways, and I would say really clearly, we don't have those as metrics laid out. I mean, I think that's really in the second year for us is on the list of like, how do we think about, I mean, to Maritza's point, we need to figure out what those metrics are for ourselves. And I think we're really lucky at this moment to be in a spot where there's no one forcing us to do it. But at that, which is great. I have no complaints about that whatsoever. But I think when we get to that point, I'm very much thinking about how do we prioritize metrics that focus on the community that we're trying to build and the actual tool building work that we're doing. And then also, I feel like the flip side, which is not where we're at, but where we will be at, is convincing funders that those are the metrics that are important. I really, and the time that I spent in public media has me feeling, maybe the phrase to use is some type of way about funder deliverables. Like I kind of get a little eye twitch when I think about funders requesting things that in the end, at me as someone far down the line on some grant project, is saying, why are we collecting this information? Why are we doing this way? This is not the purpose of this. I would really love to be able to say to funders, this is what's important. Let's do this, and not some sort of outsized metrics that other folks like. I mean, hits are. I would love to know who's reading the things, and I do want to know those things. But are those the most important things for building a community based around the exchange and distribution of civic tools and bettering everyone's access to civic information? I'm not sure that those are the right metrics. So.
Just wanted to pause for a minute and say, you know, if there's folks who are listening in and they have a question that they want to ask, I think there's a way you can drop that question in and Alberto will let me know or ask that question. So please, like bring your questions to the table as well. Lawrence, I wanted to see if I could get you to talk a little bit about the concept of fresh learning. So for me, it was a new thing, you know, coming from a very traditional journalistic background. When I first heard about it, I was kind of like, oh, what is this thing we're talking about? Is it touchy-feely, fresh learning? But I've really grown to appreciate the way that we value folks who are documenters and their own growth. And so I just wondered if you could just talk a little bit about that and kind of how it's used, because I think it fits with what we were talking about before in terms of building a community and growing that community.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I want to say from the start that Cleveland Documenters is very much a marriage of approaches between city bureaus, like don't engage, equip, and focus on civic tools, and our parent organization, which is Neighborhood Connections and the Neighbor Up Network, which is really focused on community building and community network building. And this fresh learning concept very much comes out of Neighbor Up. I mean, the idea is just basically it's really simple. Coming into a space where everyone has a sort of equal footing, and then we all learn what's new. I mean, I think a good way to think about this, I'm trying to think of a framework where I explain it, because I had the exact, coming into Neighbor Up in the Neighbor Up way, I had the exact same initial response, like, this is touchy-feely, and I'm not sure that it's for me. But the thing I sort of feel about Neighbor Up, the thing what happened to me is just sitting with that process and going through it, you see its benefits and you see how community is built. I've sort of lost my train of thought about about fresh learning. I mean, I think a way to think about it is that like with fresh learning overall, not as like a sort of an event or practice, but we see the whole of this community and we talk with documenters about this all being a learning community. And we don't just mean them. All of us, every time we get together, and we get together on a regular basis, monthly, and then other separate events, all virtually for now, all of us are learning. And I feel like telling documenters that from the start makes them feel like when they're on assignment, that like, it's okay if you don't know something. But it also means that when we are gathering and we're talking with them, they don't feel like, oh, well, this person's an expert, so I'm not going to tell them that. Like, I'm not going to bother sharing what I see. It makes it a space where, hey, I saw this thing. What is this? And you can bring it up and actually see the impact, like share that knowledge. And we actually are building community knowledge and honestly making decisions based off that new learning. I mean, I can legitimately say for the reporting that we've done and the other projects that we've done, none of that has come because somebody on like the core documenters team was like, oh, we should do this thing. Every single thing we've done is because a documenter came to us and said, hey, I have an idea. And I think for us, the job is not to figure out what they want and do what they, I mean, to like poll them and like make what they want fit into a box. When they have ideas and they have things that they want to go after, I think the thing for us is to figure out how do we equip them for that? Like, how do we make that happen as we're holding the space? So maybe that's sort of like a larger view of fresh learning, because I sort of don't, and we do it as a general practice. Our community of practice, our group gatherings are called fresh learning, and it's always something new for us, new for them. But I feel like just that idea, like we're all learning something together, is a really crucial basis for how we gather and how we hold the space for residents to participate and for us to collaboratively work together on this. And that's how we see this as collaborative work.
So each of you at some point has either written or talked about growth, not growing too fast, but also needing to grow because there's so many people that need served. There's that always that push and pull, like people need the information, but we're not everybody. We can only serve so many humans at once. And so I would love to hear a little bit about how you balance that, how you balance those needs to do more, but also to do it well and do it sustainably. And then if you're able, a little bit how you think about that personally, because I feel like I often hear from folks that are pushing into this new territory that it's exhausting. So kind of balancing it both for the community and the growth, but then maybe also a little bit personally, if either of you can talk to those things.
Yeah, I was thinking when I first applied for this fellowship with Stanford, Connect Arizona was just an experiment. It was just 2 or 3 months in, and I thought that this was going to be something that as soon as the pandemic was going away, the Connect Arizona was going away too. And it hasn't. We have been growing a lot. And the thing is, I'm always overthinking stuff and I'm always creating, and my brain never stops. And that's for sure. I always have ideas. So we grew from the WhatsApp group to the broadcast list, and then we launched the radio show, who's going to be 1 year tomorrow. We're still celebrating. Well, and then we launched the newsletter. And I'm thinking of so many things else that I can do with Connect Arizona, but then I realized that I needed to stop and start developing the products that I already have for Connect Arizona and that are actually needed by the community, not just something that I wanted it to do. It is really hard because we as journalists, we always want to work on stories. We want to work in different formats and platforms. And that's sometimes it takes like a while. It is really easy to launch it, but it's very difficult to maintain it. For example, with Connect Arizona, we have La Hora del Cafecito every single day from 2 to 3 p.m. Arizona time. And sometimes I'm traveling and sometimes I'm tired and I don't know, I have a doctor's appointment and I'm texting, or if I go to Mexico, that's lunch break in Mexico. So I'm with my mom eating something with my cell phone in my hand, just WhatsApp and texting. And actually I realized that Connect Arizona means commitment. that we as journalists, that's investing our time and our resources to the community, that's actually what has helped Connect Arizona grow, because now forcing me and my community to have those conversations and now enjoying those conversations is actually the fuel of and oil from our machine. But I remember what Don always told me when I had this imposter syndrome on my mind is like, Maritza, we are investing in you. And that's our way to invest in your community. And she was right, because she was investing in a person who was willing to invest in a community. But now take it to the big scale, to the big media outlet. And I worked for very different TV stations before and newspapers. So they don't have the time or the will to invest in the community, because it takes a lot of time to listen. It takes a lot of time to ask them questions. It takes a lot of courage to take those answers from the community and put them into action. They want to have community engagement and they want it fast. They want to put out something on Facebook and they want to have, I don't know how many likes and shares and responses. And that's now how community engagement works. Community engagement works doing the work in the community, the same community that you belong to being part of it and investing your time in those intangible resources that are so important. In the personal level, I love it. And I'm always high in caffeine. So having La Hora de Cafecito was a perfect fit for me. But then like a month ago, everything went wrong that I could think of. And I had a meltdown. And that's when I say, I need to also stop and make sure that I'm okay, so my community is okay. Because the work that I'm doing, it is important and I want to keep doing it. So I rather use my resources, my personal resources, my professional resources well, so I can keep doing this work that I'm doing. It is not easy, but I'm a very resilient person and I'm always full of energy. So that helps a lot. But another thing that we need to do more is educate the people that we work with more about the job that we're doing, because nobody gets how we can do community journalism and not produce so much at the same time.
It's a really, really good point. And just really quick too, I wanted to say, you talked about when you were a JSK fellow, like the investment in you when you're doing that. But also, I know there was a lot of conversations about investments in community journalism and how difficult it is to get people to invest in that, because folks want to invest in the thing that they already know, even though clearly the track record for it isn't that great right now. And so when you're talking about things that are really like unexplored territories, it is harder. So I don't know if you've been doing this for a year and a half, if there's a couple things you've learned that you wanted to share. And then after that, I'll probably have like one more question and then we'll start to wrap up.
I have learned so many things in this past year and a half. The first thing on personal side is what I bring to the table is enough and what I say matters. It is so important to have people that look like me working on the same stories that I'm interested in. So there is no new if you're working for a Spanish Latino media outlet that you want to have a Latino doing the work for you. Accents are beautiful, and that's something that we should always embrace. And I think being mindful and human about the work that we do, it is so important. We are human, and that's the most important ability or characteristic that we have as journalists, that we need to use that when we're working. And during this year and a half, what has helped me to connect with my community is empathy and showing them my human and vulnerable side, even though it's putting sometimes a little bit too much of me out there, but they can relate and they trust me because they see that I'm going through the same struggles and the same issues and everything as they do. And I think having more journalists of color serving these color communities, it is so important, so we can start creating more empathy and not just being reactionary to the things that they're putting out there for us.
Thank you. And Lawrence, I didn't know if you had a thought off of that. And if not, I have another question for you.
My thought was just more to your earlier question, just about how to think about growth. And I mean, I really feel like, I mean, two things. I feel like it doesn't make any sense. I think about capacity a lot. If there's anything that keeps me up at night, it's thinking about capacity. And to me, in this situation that we're in with news and information, I mean, we talk about gaps, the gaps that there are and news deserts, but it's not really a gap. It's a chasm. And I don't think it's realistic to come into it saying like, I'm going to be able to fill all of that. So I think if you want to continue doing it, you got to pick and choose, and you have to say no. And you have to think about decisions in terms of your capacity and your team's capacity. And I think a lot about, just really quickly, because I know we're running out of time, I think about a rubric about how to build trust that a friend of mine said to me once, that there are 3 stages of building trust: shared values, reliability, competency, and then reliability. And when I'm thinking about capacity, I'm thinking those things. We can get to shared values, but if I go and chase everything, I may do a couple things good, but I'm probably not going to do them all good. And I'm definitely not going to be able to do them reliably. So like when making a decision about like, are we going to go down this path? It's a need. Can we fill that need? Can we do it well? Can we do it again and be there every time to build trust with the community? I think about those things a lot. Personally, I would just say that I feel like I am an expert at saying no. I'm really good at saying no. I enjoy saying no. I think saying no is the most therapeutic possible thing in the world, and I try to do it for myself all the time. I don't have time for that, and I don't feel bad about it.
Oh, and I'm so trying to learn from that.
We're working on it.
Lawrence, I've heard and had a lot of conversations that you've been a part of talking about tools, really shifting the conversation from what story can we get from you for us to tell to what tool can we provide you that you can use however you want to use it. So, and we actually had a great documenters conversation about this recently. So what kind of what can civic-minded technologists or folks who do help create that stuff, what can they do to help with this work so that we're not just narrowly defining this information sharing for like quote unquote journalists?
I think it's a really interesting question. And in a way, it's one that's coming up for us right now. We just recently at one of our monthly gatherings, we called Documenters Community of Practice, invited a number of civic tech folks into the room to talk with documenters, to just brainstorm tools, civic tools. I mean, the documenters are kind of in a really interesting position in that they're residents, they have on the ground resident expertise, but they also have expertise of being in these meetings and having really good and clear ideas about what the information gaps are. And I think we have come to the realization that like folks tend to think about tech as something that only tech folks do. But really the bulk of building an app or building a tech tool is not the engineering, it's the conceptualizing. And that takes expertise of the folks involved. It takes all of this other work that is not technological at all. And so we're really trying to bring civic tech folks into the documenters community so we can collaborate together to build those tools. So I obviously can't speak to the questioner's city, but in Cleveland, we really feel like this documenters work building civic tools those tools aren't just information tools, or they're not just reporting, or they're not just notes. Tech tools are part of that. I think the things we're working on to document public comment with apps and a number of other things are all sort of in the works. All of those are really part of this sort of civic tool landscape. So I think those things can be really closely involved, because in the end, all of these sorts of things give folks better access to civic information and understanding their cities.
All right. So one thing that I was thinking about is that you know, each of you have gotten the opportunity to be fellows kind of in a cohort with other people. So it's like a different model than the JSK fellowships have been in the past. You know, you're in different places, but you're meeting, you're talking, you're probably doing some complaining and some celebrating. You know, from that experience of working with other folks who are trying to solve really difficult problems, you know, especially for communities of color, you know, how do you think about that space as a collaborative space, you know, not a space where you compete, but a space where you share ideas and help each other solve these problems?
I feel that we are a family, actually. It's like we really want to go and buy a van and just give a tour and visit everybody's houses and have coffee and happy hour and everything, because the support that we have had during this year and a half that I've been with Stanford is been amazing. A month ago, when I had this meltdown, I remember that I was having a session with Tran, and then I got so many phone calls that everything that could go wrong went wrong that day. And I was crying, and she let me just cry. And I don't cry easily. And it's the first time that I have cried in the past, I don't know how many years. And she was like, and I felt that if the world just like, I don't know, scrambles and it falls over me, somebody else is going to be just next to me trying to put all the pieces together. And I don't know, even though we have never met in person, I feel that every time that we meet, they hug me and they empower me, and that I know that even when not everything is going to be okay all the time, I think that I can have a sisterhood, a brotherhood, like a family that I can always go back and ask for help. And I think that is the most important thing, because we are not competition. Probably we are all creating different paths at the same time. And eventually everything is going to cross. So we are all fighting our own fights from different perspectives. But it's so important to know that we're like walking the same walk together, and that we can actually identify and feel empathy and feel love and understand and accepted, and that we are all together enough. So I think that's the most important thing of it.
I have two thoughts about this. One is that like I don't feel even the slightest bit of competition, like to the reverse. Honestly, really, it's like we are all these people who are working not on all the same things, but in this sort of same stream, where often we're the only ones in our respective places, except for a couple of other people who are doing that work. So having a place to talk about that work and to sort of, I mean, you're learning all the time, but I feel like being together really just like exponentially increases the sort of learning you can do about your work, because there's so many people doing similar work. But the second thing really is that for me personally, in my own like professional career, I really feel that like I'm only a couple years into people actually like listening and paying attention to what I'm saying professionally. And some of that, I mean, and I'm almost 47 years old, but some of that is also being a person of color, particularly a Black male in the workplace. I was just having this conversation with one of the JSK cohort members yesterday at our meeting. And so being in a space where I say things and am understood and am seen and can see others is so crucial. And I would not have, at the start of beginning this JSK fellowship, I don't think I would have listed that as something that I was looking to get out of that. But getting that back for me, I feel like maybe a way to say this is being seen by that group of people makes me see myself differently and the work that I can do differently. And at just even halfway through, it is utterly crucial to the work that I have to do. And honestly, so for anyone thinking about whether or not a JSK fellowship is right for them, particularly folks of color, do it, because the way that it has affected how I see myself as a leader as someone, like, I mean, I think I even said yesterday in the meeting, like, thinking about leadership, I kind of felt some type of way about it. Like, am I a leader? I mean, I'm willing to do this work, but am I a leader? Should I be leading? That's not a question I'm asking myself anymore. It's more like, what do I need to do to lead this? And that's very much, I mean, yes, it's about what we're learning in the fellowship, but so much of that is just talking to that cohort of people and feeling seen when I'm speaking and understood. Folks of color don't get that often in the workplace, get it very little. And so to be able to get that in this environment is hugely beneficial.
I just want to mention who Tran is when I say that I had the mental and she helped me out. Tran is our coach from the senior year with this fellowship, and she's fantastic. She has been working with us for the past year and a half, and she is the one who asks the questions to the people who ask questions for a living. So she's like always making us think and overthink, and then just like start growing and smarter. And she's been an amazing mentor and coach for us.
Sounds great. I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and I wanted to just thank both of you, imposter system or imposter, feelings aside, real leaders and real visionaries. I know that the JSK fellowship is a journalism fellowship, but I think there's just a lot of visionary thinking about civic information, and I think, as Lawrence calls it, social infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So I think we're just about done, but I'd love to just leave it off with kind of a question about when we're thinking about that, what the future holds. Why is this a time to think big about the shift in journalism and how it interacts with communities instead of just tinkering around the edges?
Well, I mean, I can speak to it a little bit. I mean, I think tinkering around the edges makes sense if what you're talking about is small gaps. And gap is not even the word that describes the as I said before, the chasm that needs to be filled. And I think if you have a small crack, you put some spackle in it. But if it's a giant hole, you might as well build something new that suits the functions that you need in that space. And maybe it's the time. I mean, I don't know if it's the time to do it. I just feel like we're here now. So let's get it. Let's do that work. Let's build something new with collaboratively with other folks. That's how I think about it. Don't waste time trying to fill a gap. Build a new thing.
And I'll love to have conversations with you all. If you want to know more about what we're doing and why we're doing this, feel happy to send me an email. We'll schedule a virtual cafecito and we can talk a little bit more about the work that we're doing, not just during this fellowship, but the things that we're doing in our communities, investing in the communities, and how we're changing the narratives together, because that's what we're doing, is taking back the narrative of our own communities with our accents and voices and accents and stories and everything.
Thank you. So I think that brings our conversation to a conclusion. And I was like, wow, are we going to do that for an hour? But we really did. And I think that it was a really great conversation. I actually have some new thoughts sparking in my mind from the things that you all said. And I hope that others that tuned in also do. And I don't know if anybody else has some other final thoughts or greetings or thank yous.
I'd just like to thank you, Rachel, for doing a great job moderating a really interesting conversation about community and diversity and the ability to make a difference in communities around the United States. So thank you for the great questions, and to thank you to Lawrence and Maritza, and to thank you all of you folks here at Stanford who are watching this event. And we're going to be having another one next quarter as well. Alberto, I don't know if you want to say anything else.
No, thank you for the invitation, and we really appreciate being able to connect with all of you. So thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.